So the council is already over,
Mm-hmm.
and the changes have already been happening. What that means that while you were in minor seminary, you all were dealing with, and the internet wasn't around back then, so you'd have to read newspapers and magazines and hear the latest scoop from your
Yes,
professors
yeah.
and teachers. What was the general feeling about what was going on at the council?
Well, the impression I got certainly was that the wheels were starting to fall off everything because very soon you would start to hear, very soon in high school, I'd start to hear about different liturgical abuses, priests fooling around with the Mass, celebrating Mass in a very irreverent way, priests running off and getting married, priests denying different Catholic doctrines, different Catholic teachings. So I was a follower of the news. The news always interested me, and so I would read the different religious publications and papers in the secular press, and you'd hear all of these disturbing things. And it seems that things were not going well. And you had some of the professors who, were very much in favor of these. I remember in freshman year of high school arguing over some aspects of the changes with my religion professor, Father Anthony Dorn. And he had sort of open line Friday, we would call it now, when you could bring up different issues and different questions and debate it back and forth with him. And I remember all the time having arguments with him about the different changes.
I can't imagine you having arguments with anybody.
No, I know it's
much less at 16 or 17.
Certainly not. No, I'm a real marshmallow.
And were his responses satisfying to you and to your classmates?
No, well, to my classmates, some of my classmates, of course, but certainly not to me. Because you started to see the changes in the discipline and the worship and everything, and everything started to seem to go downhill. That was you started to see that virtually right away. And, a kid could see it, a 14-year-old kid could see that this is not working. Or a 14-year-old kid could see that having Father Clarence Rivers, who was a priest of the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, sing Negro spiritual Mass in your parish church, that this was not terribly respectful toward as regards the reverence due to the Blessed Sacrament in the Mass. So the whole series of things like that.
So as you're going into major seminary that fall, is your sense that this is sort of passing? This is a fever that some people have caught, and it'll pass, and things are going to go back to as they were, and I'm going to see lots of young men in cassocks having their morning cigarette, and this is just a passing thing. Was that your sense going in?
No, I'm not quite sure what it was. It was because it was extremely distressing. I think the general question is what next, and why isn't anyone doing his job and cracking the whip? And you didn't see that really at any level. The rector of the major seminary there was in effect a revolt against him, and the archbishop backed the people who were doing the revolting. And that also happened in the seminary college where I was, that there's a whole class who in effect revolted against against the Latin teacher in college, and the administration backed up the revolutionaries. So you're scratching your head saying, what exactly am I getting into? And this was joined to the courses in the seminary college. At that point they moved philosophy, some of the philosophy and some of the theology down into the college level rather than keeping it for the major seminary. But the stuff that I was taught was, positively horrifying and heretical. I had a couple of good professors who were quite orthodox and stout in maintaining Catholic doctrines, but most of them were not. I had a scripture professor who questioned just about everything in the New Testament. It was just like a series of little stories that you had. So I mean, and this was an ongoing problem.
So for you, recognize and resist started early on in seminary here, where you had to recognize modernism and resist it.
I would say there was a different, a little bit of a different take on that. Yes.
As I found in my own early exploration of a possible vocation, you always find a coterie or at least a group of friends who think like you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure some of them came along from the minor seminary along with you to
Mm-hmm.
the major seminary. I guess I'm thinking further down the road if you're still in touch with anybody from the old days in this way. But secondly, what were you thinking? I'm thinking in terms of someone like Father Oswald had told me as they were going through seminary, there was a group of them that they were going to wear cassocks.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as, ordination was over, they'd be out in cassocks and you couldn't stop them. You'd already laid
Sure,
hands
yeah.
on. So as you're going through this process, did you find like minds and did you guys stick together? And
I think that all of the you found that phenomenon in all of the seminaries that were going through these changes. It was certainly the case in Milwaukee that there's a small coterie of conservatives who were maybe hoping a little bit for better days and thinking that, well, they were going to do things differently. It was certainly the case in New York, for instance, in Bishop Sanborn's seminary. There were a few conservatives, and eventually 3 of them ended up at a cone. Donald Sanborn, Clarence Kelly, and Anthony Ward ended up at a cone. So that was a phenomenon that you had in those days. The fellows that I knew from those days in the minor seminary and in the seminary college who were somewhat conservative either left the seminary or eventually surrendered.
well, surrendering aside, you made it through minor seminary and major seminary as well.